I'll do a bilingual one. Okay, how's that?
Capo.
Okay, just let me gather my thoughts. Heavenly Father, I do thank you for another day in our lives. I do ask that you look with favour upon us all, and especially our families. I ask that you lead and guide us on this day, and in the days that lie ahead, and especially in this moment of concern, as we all know, with the coronavirus. Nā reira, mati atua tātou e manaki, e tiaki, e a rahi I roto tōna rangi Māria, I tēnei rangi, me ngā rā e heke mai nei. Nā reira, e inoi ana mātou I runga tingo o te matua, te tama, me te wairua tapu. Āmane. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Api. What I'd like to do now, for Annalie's benefit, are you there, Annalie? Maybe she can't hear us. I think we need to have a sense of who's here. Annalie, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I can't see you. Now, so can everyone just go around the room, as it were? I don't know quite what order we're going to do that. But just record who's here. I'm obviously here at Martin Williams. Just say your name and we'll see how we go.
Paul Michelson. Please. Paul Michelson.
Panu.
Keith Price.
Keith Price.
Craig Little. And I'd like to introduce our alternative delegate, Mike Hardy. He's up in my top right-hand bit. I don't know whether he's in yours.
Craig Thu, and apologies for lateness from Sandra Hess, Mayor Hazelhurst.
Alex Hawke.
Kia ora, Andrew Pelleray from Napier Port.
Ian Phillips from Hastings District Council.
Kate Taylor, CHB District Council.
Robin Marley, Napier City Council.
Hello, Api Robin, Tai Whenua Rep. Kia ora.
Thank you, Martin. I think I've got them all.
Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to the meeting. I'm hoping that Anne is going to be able to share the agenda. Obviously, these are interesting times, to say the least, and this may be a challenging meeting, albeit I'm intending a brief one, where we will, in reasonably swift fashion, move through the agenda. Can I just commence, before we get to notices and apologies, with a the message that we were intending on having a workshop today. And I want to discuss at some point how we might progress the workshop in a virtual way, so that we can keep that work stream alive. So I'll come back to that, and we're just going to dive into the agenda, which hopefully Anne can share from her system, so that you can see there it is. It's just popped up on my screen. That's all I can see at the moment.
Martin, that's the minutes first.
Oh, the minutes? Okay, right. Well,
if you're happy to start with that.
Well, look, yes, so I've got, are there any notices or apologies to record first?
Mayor Hazelhurst for lateness.
Yes, apologies from Josh Lloyd from Central Hawke's Bay District Council. Can we just move that, Mr. Chair?
All right, move. We accept the apologies. I will.
Who was the
Seconder?
mover?
Martin.
Right.
I will second Alex.
Thank you.
My apologies.
All in favour?
I've somehow got the minutes of a meeting of the Regional Council, not the Regional Transport Committee. Just one moment, I will find the correct minutes.
All right, in the meantime, anyone all in favour of those apologies being accepted?
Aye.
Anyone against, perhaps more to the point? All right, so that's all good. Any conflict of interest declarations? No. All right, so confirmation of the minutes of the previous committee meeting. Has anyone had, while Anne's looking for them, a chance to read them and be willing to move that they be accepted? No one's read them? All right, well, we'll come back to that once they're up. And you keep beavering away. The next item on the agenda is follow-ups from the previous Regional Transport Committee meeting. I'm leaning forward because I've got my laptop here where I've got the agenda on, so I can look at that at the same time. The follow-ups, one as to the letter regarding State Highway 38 has been completed. The other one is the workshop, which has been postponed. So I might as well talk to that while Anne's looking for the minutes of the previous meeting when she found it. Okay, so is that the agenda, Anne, or is that the minutes? It's the agenda.
Apologies, few technical issues.
I'll keep talking about the workshop while Anne's looking for the minutes. Right, we had two experts coming up. Is it Richard Cross and Darren Davis from the Ministry of Transport and Stantec, respectively, and they were going to look at the issue of innovation. And our transport future was the headline, and I think you all saw the brief of what they were going to cover. The idea being for us to have some access to the latest thinking on mode shift and applications of technologies to more efficiently use our transport network with on-demand transport options, those kinds of things. That's important work as we work towards, I guess, the business case and priority phases of our regional transport plan preparation, which I know we're going to talk about later. I'm keen to keep that work stream going because I think, in these unusual times, we have an opportunity to continue to try and plan for the world we want to see when we come to, things normalise. So we shouldn't waste that time, and we can all be in touch with each other and continue the thinking and discussion. So we'll come back to you, I guess, with options for progressing that workshop. One option would be where we get the presenters to actually record their presentations, that everyone views them, that we circulate some sort of feedback Q&A paper, or that we have a specific Zoom conference where we reflect on what we've heard and which we have the presenters present, or some combination thereof. So I don't want to lose that opportunity. I don't want to lose too much momentum here. As I say, one thing we have got is time to think and plan. We may not be able to go outside, but we can still do that. So that's my thoughts on the workshop. Is there any feedback on that before we go back to confirming the minutes? Okay, I'll take that. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Martin, it's Mayor Alex here. Can I just add a comment?
Sure.
I think this process of this workshopping is incredibly important because the aspirations to do things a bit differently and in a more coordinated and resilient and sustainable fashion is certainly loud and clear from our community and loud and clear from leaders and councillors across the region. And so I agree with you, this is truly a chance to think a bit more creatively, and we've actually got some breathing space right now, you could say, to do that. And so certainly absolutely on board with that. And some of our study, Hawke's Bay transportational study work will be really important to feeding good information into how we move forward with that.
You're just muted, Alex. Thank you. Hey, look, can I just bounce off that? You've just segued and I was just scanning through the government policy statement, which we'll come back to. But one of the pages, page 30, is making the most of our existing land transport network, and it talks about travel demand management and using what we've got better to defer maintenance or improvements. Innovation, it says, can help overcome many of the challenges facing the transport system by improving safety, greater access for people, provides opportunities to improve, transform the way people travel, how freight is moved. So I think what we're doing with this workshop is totally in alignment with some of the, and that's part of the funding section of the GPS. So I think we're probably shooting at the right targets if we do continue this work. So thank you, Alex, for that. Now, back to the minutes. You've got them there. Are you able to scroll down through those, Anne? We can just have a quick look. That was a bit fast.
Martin, I'm happy to move the minutes. I have checked with my alternate who attended the meeting, and we were happy they were true and correct.
All right, anyone want to second that?
Second it. Keith Price.
Was that you? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second it. Thank you.
Second it. All in favour?
Aye.
Yeah, anyone against? Great, passed. Annalie also reminded me, just in case I haven't shared that as yet, that when you're not speaking, if you can keep your mute function on, and if you look at the top right of your screen, there's a little double head participants, and it gives you an opportunity to put your hand up. Now, I don't know what that does, but if I imagine if I keep looking at it, I will see people's hands up. Is that how it works, Annalie? Is it?
Correct, yes. Just to control a little bit of order.
Yeah. So I'll try and keep that participants box open, and if I see your hand come up, I'll refer to you. If it doesn't, and that doesn't work, you'll just have to holler in the old-fashioned way. So let's just do the best we can with what we've got, so to speak. Right, what's next on the agenda, Anne? Could you go back to that, please?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so can everyone see the agenda? I'm scrolling down to follow-ups from the previous committee meeting.
I think we've covered that.
Right, okay. So the next item is the Regional Land Transport Plan review, and given that people haven't had a chance or much of a chance to see the agenda, I'll just run through this in a little bit more detail than I was perhaps planning to. First of all, of course, we've been talking about this for a wee while. It's a regular activity that we have to undertake as part of our legislative responsibilities. And our Hawke's Bay Transport Study, which Mayor Alex alluded to, is an important part of that. And we are, in these difficult times, trying to continue with that. And I'll go into a wee bit more detail a little bit further on. But just on the structure of the Regional Land Transport Plan, in previous funding rounds, each council has pretty much undertaken its own interpretation of the legislation and put together a regional land transport plan. in a structure unique to them. What we have as a sector decided to do this time is follow a common template which has been developed, and I've put it in the agenda as an attachment. It is just a template, but it does give a certain uniformity, which will certainly be useful for NZTA and when they're assessing our regional land transport plans. And it will also ensure that we know that everything has been ticked off in terms of the legislative requirements, because those things are all in the template. So that is there for your information. The second thing is there's a RLTP review program. Now, I'm hoping that we can just jump down to that and it will be relatively easy to see. If I go through the template, I suggest you just look at that's just for information and look at that at your leisure later. And this is going to be rather hard to view, I think, but I'll just talk to it. So basically, we're in the phase now of preparing the strategic front end of the regional land transport plan, and councils are starting to think about their programs for the next period. And Hastings has been doing quite a bit of work in terms of its capital program for the next 3 years. Napier has been undertaking developing a strategy to work out what needs to happen there. And then regionally, of course, we are undertaking this transport study. So the transport study is in 3 parts, and we have almost completed updating, or the consultants have almost completed updating the transport model for the Heritonga Plains, and there's been some work done by Urban Connection with Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa around the rural parts that will kind of bolt on to what comes out of the transport model. We are held up a wee bit with the model due to the fact that census data, some census data that is needed to feed into that is delayed and will only be released in May. So that's one important part of this. The model is a tool which we will use for testing various scenarios. The next part of the front end, or sort of setting the direction for the regional land transport plan, is the development of a network operating framework, and that work's underway at present as well. Chairman Martin came to the first workshop, which I think was only last week, seems like a lifetime now. And there's another one coming up we'll attempt to undertake by Zoom as well. And the third phase of the transport study is to develop a program business case. The agenda has a little bit of information about what each of those, or those latter 2 stages actually entail. But we have a tender evaluation meeting on Monday with the technical group members, and hopefully we select a preferred consultant from that. Well, we will select a preferred consultant. So the only other part of this, and again, I can't really go through it in detail perhaps so easily, but if you've got the agenda in front of you, we've written a setting the scene document, which is a background to the regional strategic direction, as it were, and I'm just bringing that up now. It's once over lightly of some of the key things about the region that are underway at present. This is first, of course, is just about the region itself, our economy, population growth, employment, those sorts of things. Of course, this was all written pre-pandemic actually reaching New Zealand, so some of this may never be true again, and some maybe, hopefully will be. Yeah, but it's for reading and evaluation, and I would just like any feedback on gaps, what you think is missing, what's incorrect, if I've got anything that's out of date. I hope not, but This will help to set the scene for our strategic front end of the Regional Land Transport Plan. So I'll take any questions. I'm hoping that you have actually had a chance, some of you have had a chance to look at it. It was certainly intended that you would have. I'll skip through to the summary of issues at the end. So there's a section on how we get around noting traffic growth on some of the key links across the region. Noting that our light vehicle fleet has grown enormously in Hawke's Bay, as has our per capita vehicle ownership. So we are, not only got more people, but we're owning more vehicles per person. There's a section on freight transport and the port, and a section on air transport, public transport, mentioning, obviously we've referred to the fact that our population is ageing, and that we've got a large growth in retirement, in the retirement sector underway at present, certainly in the Heritonga Plains. There's a bit of discussion of walking and cycling.
And people will be able to read this. I'm wondering if you could answer a couple of questions from me. One is how important the setting the scene part of the plan is for our priorities of works and the network development, and equally, I guess the other question is, when would you need feedback from people on the strategic context section of this plan?
Right. Well, this is not the full strategic context. This was really to get people thinking, and it will help as we go through the issues identification in the study. Sort of the key issues to be addressed for the transport network in the next period. So perhaps if I just jump to the conclusions, it's really a thought. It's to get the committee thinking. And to amplify and expand on some of these issues as we go forward into developing the strategic front end. So just again, it's not everything, but some of the conclusions that I just wanted to highlight: our freight growth, current and forecast population growth, addressing climate change, obviously is going to be one of our greatest challenges. The need to plan our transport and land use effectively so that we're reducing the need for travel as much as possible, making that as efficient as possible. Commuter traffic is growing rapidly on strategic links and placing demands on the network capacity, and that's an issue that we're probably going to be facing in the near future. We need to think innovatively about how to provide mobility for increasing numbers of older residents. Driver choices and behaviour, obviously road safety, and we've still got areas on the particularly rural roads which are unforgiving of error, and of course that we need to maintain those vital effective links with our neighbours, and that may become increasingly difficult as greater resilience issues pop up with climate change, extreme weather events, and so on. So it's a little difficult if people haven't read it in detail, but just to summarise my response to you, Martin, it's a thought piece rather than the full strategic direction. Obviously, issues identification will come through our study, and this is really just giving some hints of the direction of that things may go in, and there may be many areas that I've missed or which we haven't given sufficient emphasis to. So it's really just to get that thought process moving.
And when would you like? Thank you. And when would you like feedback by?
Well, if people are able to do it within the next week or 10 days, I would appreciate that, because I'll be working on it as we're in the lockdown period. And of course, we will be continuing on with the study phases. So we would like some of this to feed into that. So maybe a maximum of 2 weeks.
Thank you. Now I've got hands up from Emma, Craig and Alex. So in that order, Emma.
Hi, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Anne. Look, I think it's really it's great having this as a starter for the conversation and to push our thinking. There's probably 2 points that I would make, and it may be a part of the next conversation we have on this. One is that it's really important to be looking at where the future is going in an unconstrained environment. So looking firstly at what's likely to happen based on current forecasts. So the 10-year freight projections, the 10-year growth in potential tourism and all those sorts of things, bearing in mind obviously everything will be changing in the short term. But then also, and this was part of the conversation that the mayors and chief executives had with Nicole and Sir Brian when we were up in Hawke's Bay, which was, don't be constrained by the 3, 6 and 10-year timeframes. Cast yourselves even further forward and think 30 or 50 years, because these are long-term assets in the transport sector. And so I think be thinking about, what do you see as a desired future for this region, so that you've got some aspirations sitting there that then you've got the shorter term steps towards it are integrated with how you're operating. So I think it's really important to know where you are now, and then it's also important to cast a bit further forward than the period of the RLTP as well. So that's really my 2 points.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Now, Craig.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. And I guess reiterating Emma's comment, that was pretty much where I was going to sort of start. Thinking through what is our future state, thinking through, particularly as we move forward, what are the enabling opportunities, the things we're not achieving because things are as they are, and thinking really long term. But just in terms of the current context, it would be my recommendation that resilience is taken outside of climate change and has its own topic and is worked through slightly more thoroughly. Otherwise, it will just get lost in people thinking through climate change, because the network has, if our goal is around safely and efficiently connecting households and businesses, the resilience effects are quite widespread and not just necessarily related through to climate change stuff. So I would recommend that in the context document, resilience stands on its own, and that situation is touched on that way.
Thanks, Craig.
Alex.
Thank you, and I agree with both Emma and Craig's additional points. There's some other things for me to add into here. One is the vision that resides regionally within Matariki and PO3, which talks about enduring and resilient infrastructure, which also has language around what does the spatial plan for the future of infrastructure look like across Hawke's Bay. So can we make sure that we connect in some of that language? I don't think we've got enough information about what current state and future state of commuters looks like. And I also don't think we've got a really good understanding of even current, let alone future state, of truly how does social and economic pathways operate across the region, and how, in a transport sense, local roads and rural communities to the north and to the south, how they flow people and employees and goods that converges in Napier or exits the region to the north, to the south, or to the west. It's not clearly articulated in that sort of summary, and I think we need to think carefully about that. I had also noted the same thing Craig did about let's not talk about resilience links just in the case of climate change. We must recognise our resilience route to the west being the Taihape Road, as well as to the south and to the north. The route to the north has had a lot of attention recently with Wairoa and Gisborne links. We still need to maintain that, but also to the north at northwest, if you want to call it, to Taupō as well, and that State Highway 5 is just a disaster at the moment. So all of those 4 key links in and out of the region. And basically, I think there is the chance to have quite a big conversation about what a spatial plan for the Hawke's Bay region looks like, and how we connect that to transport links. I'd also like to add Central Hawke's Bay is doing locally spatial plan work that's tying into a lot of our local infrastructure work. So please, we need to make sure that conversation connects into the regional plan as well. And that ticks all of the things that I'd written on my piece of paper as we were listening. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. All right, is there any other, Emma, have you got your hand up again? Or did you not take it down?
No, I probably didn't take it down. There,
right, now
gone.
I'll just go down. Anyone else wanting to speak to this draft initial land transport plan, the background section in particular? And
yeah, that's me. You have sound and video? Don't have sound. Got video. My name's Ray now. I need to change that.
Good morning. Who's joined us?
So you've got no sound, you say? No sound coming out, no. Okay. Okay, let's have a look.
Sorry, I'm not sure who's joined us and who's talking now.
That's Ian Emerson from Emerson's Transport.
Ian. Yes, I thought it was. So, Ian, you're Ray. All right. Okay, well, look, any questions for Anne on the overview she's given of the transport study and or the setting the scene draft land transport plan? Alex?
Martin, could I say one more thing? That I think we need to get into our thinking and our language through this process, not just about our state highway, regional, national links, but actually the context of local roads as the collectors, both from a social and economic perspective. And I don't think we quite get that clear enough. And I think that's probably why the different TAs go and do their own logic thinking and planning in the inconsistent way that Anne mentioned, because we actually probably haven't at a regional level laid a really good strategic context for them. So I think a bit more attention to how local roads fit into the mix would be really helpful.
Thank you. Look, just reflecting back on the spatial plan point, because I know that Sandra's very keen on that. We have got a form of spatial plan for the Heratonga Plains area, but we don't have one for the region. And I'm wondering if that's something we could perhaps a minute that I might take back to Rex and James to introduce through the Leaders Forum. In other words, you know, through our triennial agreement as a discussion item.
Martin, if I just respond to that it has been an item we've been discussing at the Leaders Forum for some time. Indeed, we made a commitment to developing a regional spatial plan, but to be perfectly frank, we haven't resourced that yet, and it's a very, very big undertaking with various district plan reviews and regional resource management plan changes underway. And certainly I'm aware in the current piece of work that has been done nationally around a review of the Resource Management Act, there is a high degree of alignment, I think, within the review panel and many of the stakeholders around the need for a regional spatial planning framework to be essentially the centrepiece of resource management planning, but also brings in regional transport planning and other infrastructure. So look, I think it's a really important thing for us to progress towards. We do need to have the conversation about how on earth we resource it and how do all our other planning instruments weave into that exercise.
Thank you, James. And yes, I mean, I just really am bouncing off Emma's point also about thinking over the longer term. This isn't something that, you know, we're going to suddenly develop in the next 12 months or even necessarily 24 months, but it is a work stream that a more integrated region, you know, is begging for and would set a broader context for these types of transport planning initiatives going forward, and for some of the issues that Alex has covered, I would have thought. Yeah, so let's make sure that we don't lose sight of that. It's something that's being raised with me quite a bit. And thanks for that feedback, James. Right, any other feedback on Anne's report? Just, Anne, I've got one question. When do we need, I couldn't really see the timeframes appendix 2 to your report, or to the plan, to your report, I think. Just walk us through the key milestone dates for development of this plan from this point.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just first to make one point that, I mean, the strategic front end will really be formed through our transport study. This was just really to get people thinking about some of the key things and the gaps. And thank you for the feedback. I will go back and amplify in those areas. We do intend that we will have a longer term view, and the network operation framework that we're developing will provide us with a picture of what we would like the transport system to be in the future. So as that work is developed, we'll be bringing that back to the committee for discussion. It's sort of taking place at a technical level first to get a framework that the committee can then consider. And then we will be able to feed that all into this. So this is really not the front end, and it was intended to be very once over lightly, but it's just as a think piece, as it were. In terms of the timeframes, we hope to have the strategic front end developed. Well, it will probably realistically have to be by the end of August, because the program business case will not be completed before then, and with the current situation, that could even stretch out a little further. Under a normal timeframe scenario, councils would be getting their programs of works for the next 3 years and 3 and 6 years into NZTA's online system by August, September. And then there would be feedback and moderation with NZTA through till December, by which time we should have the draft developed, ready to go out for consultation over December, January, consideration of submissions and so on in February, March, and then the full RLTP has to be submitted to NZTA by April 30. However, obviously some of these timeframes may have to change. But that's the standard time frame.
Thanks, Anne. Do I further understand, that's very helpful, do I further understand that the setting the scene discussion and the transport study, network operating framework, are the means by which you translate that context through to issues, through to priorities and
goals and objectives, and then throw into a program which sets about achieving that.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that's probably been enough discussion on that. We've got a sense of the timeframes ahead of us. Again, I see that alignment with the government policy statement and the workshop that we're doing. So let's not lose the momentum. Right. What's next on the agenda?
Now, are you all seeing the agenda?
We probably need to move that we've received your report, don't we?
Yes.
Correct, yes.
Sorry, who's moving that we received the report? Thanks, Alex.
I'll second.
That was
Emma.
Thank you, Emma. All in favour? And I think we're also being recommended to approve the summary work program for development as proposed.
Oh, it actually has got a typo there. Apologies. That should say plan. I'm not sure why that's happened. Not program.
Approves the summary work plan for the development of the regional transport plan. All right.
Sorry, Martin, on that approving the setting the scene document, I actually think that we probably are not ready to do that.
No, I agree. Yeah, I was just going to say
We'll
that. So we'll move. Are you moving 3 but not 4? Okay, I'll second 3. Okay, all in favour of 1 to 3 of the recommendations from Anne's report. Anyone against?
Aye.
Carried. Right, now, why don't we defer the setting the scene document for adoption? I don't know. When's our next Transport Committee meeting? Is that going to be, we can get feedback to you within 2 weeks and just perhaps adopt it at our next meeting?
Yes, I mean, it will have been amplified into a more detailed of stage 2 by then in any case, but we certainly can do that.
Yeah, so let's just defer that, but we get the feedback to you within the 2 weeks. If you've given some generic feedback, if anyone's got more specific input, back to Anne within the 2 weeks it's been requested. All right, we can move now on to the next item on the agenda. Anne, please help me there. Here we go. It's the road. That's your report next, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through the appendices again, or attachments to that previous one.
Now, everyone's got your report. Are there particular aspects of the report you'd like to speak to,
Anne? Just to highlight that we just would like to set up a driver licensing governance subgroup, as we've had in the previous council term. That's the only decision making. I'm just heading down to that now. Members who've been on the committee for a while will remember that we had a portion of funding for driver licensing training in the previous 3 years, and we managed to achieve approval for some funding again, which came out in December. And we're needing to set up a governance group just to manage that. So the structure that we had last time was that the chair of the Transport Committee, one other Regional Transport Committee member, New Zealand Police and Ministry of Social Development representative managed that and reported back through to the RTC. So there's a recommendation at the end of the agenda for that. Anything else? I think I'll just take questions as long as people have had the opportunity to read the rest of it.
All right. Okay, we'll come back to the recommendations. Alex, you've got your hand up.
You can always rely on me to ask a question or make a statement, Mr. Chairman. It drives the Mayor of Wairau crazy. It drives the Mayor of Wairau crazy that I've got so much to say. I just want the point on the driver licensing group and driver licensing funding. So that has gone through the working group attached to Matariki around driver's licensing. So yes. Just and are you working with that group? Can you just explain to me how that's working? Because I would hate to see duplication of effort and administrative resource.
I've been liaising with Kerry Legette, who's not sure exact title, but is effectively charged with getting Matariki implemented around that. And I also at times have liaison with Matt Broderick, who the police representative who sits on that. As I understand, what the aim of the group is to direct the funding, to develop first of all, a clear picture of what funding is happening where. This is the Matariki group that I'm talking about. And then to identify the key priorities. Right, and so our funding would become part of that. So we would be working towards their key priorities. But in terms of actually managing and allocating the funding, that the idea would be that this regional transport committee has a small governance group to do that. But we would be working to their strategic plan.
Okay, that's good. Just so we're clear about the connections, and also the fact the reason that HBRC has been able to get a further portion of NZTA funding is that a whole lot of other Matariki group partners, including councils and Tai Whenua or Heratonga, have also contributed money, which has unlocked HBRC to get the NZTA funding. So there's a whole lot of people contributing to this funding, and I think it's important to note that.
That's good to hear, because I hadn't had any confirmation that we'd managed to achieve the local share. So Kerry's obviously going to let me know that at some point. That's great.
All right, thank you. And any other discussion, Alex, any other discussion on Anne's report? Can I have nominations, please, for the other Regional Transport Committee Territorial Authority member? And I'm thinking of Councillor or Mayor Walker might be a useful name we could add under 3.2. So I'd like to nominate you for that.
Because of my involvement in the Matariki governance group, I actually think it would be more appropriate for another member to take that seat.
All right. Any other nominations? Anyone interested?
How about you, Keith Price?
You're on mute, Keith.
Who said that?
Well, we need a TA rep. Who's not here?
Okay. How about my alternate, Kate Taylor? Would you do that?
Okay, so we've got, is that all right, Kate? Does it have to be a councillor? No, that's your Kate, that's what you're talking about, sorry. Yeah, New Zealand Police representative? That's just standard. Okay, and talk me through the rest there, Anne. So what do we need to do with those? Are those names sort of?
Okay, so what we did last time was just approach the district commander, and Matt Broderick was nominated, and I imagine he would be again. And the similar for Ministry of Social Development. It's just that they're big in the driver licensing area as well, so it's good to have their understanding of what their funding is addressing and what ours should address. So again, we would just write to the to ministry at the local ministry and ask them to nominate somebody.
Okay, well, in that case, I'd like to move that we receive your reports and that we, as to item 3, appoint Kate for 3.2 and the representatives as determined in the way Anne's explained for 3 and 4. Anyone want to second that? Thanks, Keith. All in favour? Okay, anyone against? All right. I'm taking it, you can all still hear me. It's a deafening silence, but then I've got a whole lot of mute buttons showing here on my participants list. So, all right, someone please stop me if I'm moving ahead too fast. We're now on to the RoadSafe report. Can someone please acknowledge that I can still be heard?
I can hear you.
Great. Way to go,
no
way you go,
problem.
Anne. Thank you. Oh, hello, Sandra. How are you?
Oh, hello, Chair.
Yep.
Sorry I've been late to the meeting. I've been a COVID meeting first thing, so that's where I've been.
Well, it's great to have you with us. So thank you for being able to join. Yeah, we're down through the agenda onto the RoadSafe report. We've been through the transport study, draft regional land transport plan. I'm not sure where you joined, but we have had a brief chat about socialising a spatial plan through the Leaders Forum and the triennial agreement. So that's a long-term work program, and we've just been working through Anne's report.
Right.
And we're now on to the road safety.
Okay, thank you.
There you go, Anne.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Linda Anderson sends her apologies. She's working on the welfare response through CDM today, as are a number of our staff and probably a number of all council staff. So just statistics for the year to date, as at 16th of March, we were sitting at 2 fatalities. I think we've had another one since then, unfortunately.
That's correct, Tanya.
I've updated the crash factor diagrams, which we do every time. I won't go through those in detail, but as the information comes out from NZTA, we can see trends changing, and I'll probably, for the next time around, just move the beginning of these graphs a little bit further so we can see more recent trends, because it does tend to smooth out increases over time, or recent time a little more when you have it starting in 2008. So just scrolling through that. We are still having a reasonably good trend down in alcohol-related crashes, which is good to see, and in young drivers, although obviously, you know, there's a lot of variation from quarter to quarter. Speed, which is one of the key focuses of the police this year, we are worsening in that area. And high-risk drivers, just a very slight decrease from over that 10-year period. Fatigue and distraction, quite significant reduction there. And cyclists, I think if we took a shorter trend there, we probably would see that we're having an increase again, unfortunately. So I will alter the graphs for the next meeting. And motorcyclists, as nationally, we are seeing an increasing trend there. Recent Hawke's Bay Road Safe activities. Unfortunately, of course, the major youth road safety expo has had to be cancelled. So this is already out of date. And that's a major piece of work which all of the high schools in the region, bar one, I think, send their year 11 students to. And it runs for a full week, but of course we're unable to hold that in the current situation. There's a focus on social media and working with the police around a social media campaign.
For you, Mr. Chair, and can I just ask a question on that?
Yes.
Will that be postponed until later in the year? Can we postpone it and revisit it?
We hope it can just be postponed, yes. But okay. The question is, if you get too later in the year, you run into exam times and the schools are just unable to release students and the resources. So really depends.
It's just such an effective way to get to our young people. You know, it's just such a awesome. Yeah.
It would be a shame if we can't run it.
Yes. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Anne. No problem.
So it's really just a report for information.
All right. Do we need to move that report be received?
Yes.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair. Happy to
Thank
second.
you, Your Worship. And I'll second that. It's Martin. And anyone against? No. Well, look, I apologise. We did skip over in getting to item 9 in the agenda, the two items that are separate to the agenda material. Firstly, I think, Anne, you were going to speak to the government policy statement on land transport. So I've had a chance to print it off and have a bit of a scan of it. The key thing I'm interested in is we've got a consultation time frame of the end of April or something, 26 April, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how do we and what are our priorities for input to that? do we need to have a little subcommittee or something? What do you think? So, Anne, talk us through that.
Well, we were hoping to have a presentation, which is why it's on the front page of the agenda, from the Ministry of Transport, and they are still hoping to do that. And it may be a Zoom presentation. They just need to get themselves organised and decide the approach that they're going to take. So I'm fairly hopeful that we will still be able to have that. What I had thought to do in the meantime, and I haven't been able to do it this week, unfortunately, I'll talk a little bit about our public transport response to COVID, and just for your information in a minute. But what I had hoped to do was just provide some sort of summary and a little bit of analysis and perhaps some suggested key points for a submission. But given the fact that the ministry wants to do a presentation still, it might be best to do it in that order. So what I can do is follow up with them and express if the committee's keen for a Zoom presentation, if we can proceed with that, and then discuss and agree content of a submission via a Zoom meeting. How does that sound?
Well, and my thought was, do you think the 26th April date's going to stick?
I'd imagine it will probably be extended.
All right.
Who knows, but Emma may have more of an idea on that.
Yeah. Craig, your hand's up.
That was exactly that point I was going to ask, is if Emma perhaps might be in the best opportunity to follow up with MOT. One would think there'd be some reviewing of those deadlines once we get through the end of this week and start having moved to level 4 as a country and all the things that everyone stood up. Next week, I'd expect some of those other sort of lower hanging fruit, perhaps some review of reality and deliverable. So it would be nice if we could get a heads up from MOT around how realistic those timeframes are, whether they're locking and loading them non-negotiable, because we'll need to have a think about how we resource that up properly to get a proper response in. But Anne's right, we do need to get that presentation an opportunity to have a bit of Q&A with the MOT officials to be able to put a submission in properly.
Thanks. Now, Emma.
Yeah, look, that level of planning is not yet come through to us. So I know that everything will be being looked at, and there are some quite, there's going to be some quite big challenges, and I'll talk to it when I go through our presentation. But there are going to be, we are going to be looking at what's going to change and how things are going to be impacted. And local government's obviously got a really key role to play in this, because if councils start making decisions that that change the amount of local share that might be available and those sorts of things, that is also going to have quite a material impact on what's going to happen. So there is a lot of background work being done in this space, and but also getting information back from each council is something that we'll be looking to do in the near future about what, if any, changes councils are looking at in relation to their transport funding.
Thank you. I'm wondering, and others may have a view on this, once we've heard back around timeframes, whether the TAG or the technical advisory group of this committee, or a subcommittee of that with some of the governance level members, it drives making the submission. And have you got any thoughts about an efficient way to get a submission going once we've got the timeframes confirmed? Have any others got some thoughts about that? I mean, it is pretty critical in terms of the activity class funding priorities and allocations and that sort of thing, I would have thought. Anyway, yeah, any thoughts about that?
Well, anybody else want to speak up? I mean, my thought on it was just that the sooner we could have that presentation and a bit of Q&A, the better, because that stimulates the questions and the gaps and what's going through people's minds.
Sure.
I will, in the meantime, just try and put together some sort of summary and maybe a few key my own thoughts, just as, again, as something to stimulate discussion.
All right, so we might have a Q&A session with the ministry in the relatively near future, in which everyone who's a member of this committee could participate.
Yes, I'd imagine they've got, I mean, they had already started on their round of presentations, so they'll have it already. It's just a matter of gathering the necessary people into a Zoom meeting. I will contact them today.
And then who would draft the submission, Anne?
Well, normally I draft and incorporate feedback from all the members, but I'm open if anybody else would like to do it. Please.
Or does anyone else think a subcommittee idea working with Anne's a good idea or a bad idea?
Be happy to have the weight shared. Yes, definitely. Somebody else is keen, or tag members. I mean, we would normally circulate it via tag first and then to RTC. Yeah.
Okay.
And certainly that's the best way for TAs to get their views collected into that is using the tag.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll stick with convention. Now, any more on the GPS at this stage? I think it probably covers it. We just need to stand by for a Q&A presentation, confirmation of date, and then get underway with a draft submission from the outputs of the feedback in that question and answer session. Now, the next item, Emma, I think the floor, so to speak, is yours.
Now, can you see if I brought up Emma's presentation?
I'm just going to see if I can share it, Anne, and then I can scroll through it rather than you having to
that's
try
a
and
good idea. So, yep, I'll stop my share.
Okay, just trying to see if it's letting me. No, I'm not. No, it's not letting me on my iPad. I'm not quite sure what's glitching there. And if you could share it. Yeah, no, but it's not. I've got it open and it's not letting me access the file for it. So something's not working.
We've got. Emma, you just tell me when to move.
Okay, right. If we go to slide 2, please. Thank you. So what I'll go through, the first half is kind of the business as usual strategic stuff. And it's just, I'm going to touch on these. Most of you should be familiar, but certainly if you're not, make sure that you or your officers have access to the information, because this is all feeding in to the RLTP process. And I know that the situation we're all in with COVID is going to alter timelines and all those sorts of things, but these are strategic documents. They're long-term tools for investment in assets that have long lifetimes. So that aspect of what we do won't be changing, even if some individual deadlines and processes move a bit. So this is the bread and butter of what we all need to be familiar with. And there's various links and so on available to you. So I'll rattle through these pretty quickly. So obviously a number of you came to the NLTP information sessions that we had. And that went through the investment decision-making framework. And that's a really important thing, because that's how we actually make decisions on each activity that's wanting funding. And we needed to make changes because the last GPS introduced some new components that needed to be have greater weighting around some of the environmental aspects and some of the livability and other aspects. So that flows through in the next GPS as well. So changes to that decision-making framework is really important to make sure you've got the evidence and you're preparing the right information for your business cases. Arataki, which I'll come onto in more detail, is also part of that discussion. And Anne's already talked about RLTP and the new templates for that. There is a more detailed video on that. So you can go in and see there's two aspects to that. There's a more general introduction and then some technical information. And if we go to the next slide, this just sets out the high level overview of Arataki. And this, again, really important, taking a 10-year strategic view of the land transport system and looking at every region and saying what are the key themes that we're seeing emerging. And we have asked that councils and other parties come back and provide feedback to us. Have we missed something that's really important for particular regions and so on? We felt it's really important to identify the things that we're seeing. This doesn't in any way replace what the region's view is in terms of RLTP, but it gives you more transparency about what's sitting behind where the Transport Agency is thinking about this. And I think the other key thing, as Nicole, our new Chief Executive's come on board, she's very much of the view that we need to be taking a much longer strategic view, so stretching that out to 30 to 50 years because of the scale and life of the assets that we're involved with investing in. So we will be looking to release a further version of this in August, and that will provide information about all of the background information, evidence that we've got sitting behind that. And the next slide just summarises with the IDMF that we had feedback, and we're going to be putting that information out next month. I don't think that should be too much impacted by what's happening now. And then once we then have to link in with the GPS process and make sure that any final tweaks or changes to the GPS are also then reflected in the IDMF. RLTPs, you've seen that there's a link, the next slide, and there's a link on that one which shows you where to find the more detailed information about that. And I think all the officers will be quite familiar with that one. Moving on to the next slide, one of the big themes here is around urban mobility, and we've got a Livable Cities video that's available on our website. And I think this is really important because your region has obviously some great opportunities and potential for further mode shift, both within the more urban areas and between Napier and Hastings. And so I know there's been plenty of people involved with the RTC have been really supportive of more innovative thinking about where we can add cycle and pedestrian pathways and separated facilities. So this will be, again, a theme in the GPS and something that the government's looking for opportunities in future. Moving on to the next one, the other really significant part of the government's policy is Road to Zero. And if you haven't already had a look at this, I'd really encourage you to have a look at this. The government has been really clear that this is an absolutely critical part of the land transport system. They want to see a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries over the next 10 years. And they want us to take a really innovative and wide-ranging approach to this. The next slide sets out the 5 key areas to focus on. And so we'll be looking across all 5 of these areas, and by the next RTC, I'll have some new reporting for you, which will take you through each of these and how the deaths and serious injuries over the preceding 12 months are looking in your region when we look through each of these areas. So we've got infrastructure and speed. So that's looking at changes we make on the road network itself and speed reviews. And there's already quite a lot happening in the Hawke's Bay region in both those areas. Vehicle safety, and you would have seen our recent advertising around looking at the star ratings for cars on that one. And work-related road safety. And when I've had a look at the stats for Hawke's Bay, quite a number of the deaths and serious injuries involve vehicles that are work or people travelling for work. And so that may be another avenue that we can look at in this region to target those employers and build improved road safety into their practices. Road user choices, and this relates to road policing, obviously anything that impacts on drivers, whether it's their licensing status, drug driving, drink driving, distracted driving, motorcycle safety, and so on. And again, I don't think there's any major standouts in Hawke's Bay. You have aspects of all of those in your DSI statistics. So again, it's looking across each of those areas. And finally, system management, and that's how we all work together and coordinate our efforts around safety. So that will be an ongoing part of what we do. So the unsafe speeds package, again here, this is a part of legislation that government is introducing. And so this includes safer speeds around schools, changing how everyone plans and consults on speed management changes, increasing safety cameras on the network, and transferring the ownership and operation of those to us. And so that means the speed limits won't be done by a bylaw process, and what we'll be asking is that road controlling authorities develop speed management plans, which then set a 10-year frame of what's going to happen on those, and regional transport committees will have a role in consulting on those plans every 3 years as RLTPs are developed, and we'll be working obviously with you on that. And they'll include things like what safety infrastructure investment are needed, how speed management's going to be done on local roads and on state highways, as well as safety camera investment proposals for the region. So there's still consultation planned on that for the second half of this year, and then rule changes to go into effect. So again, I would expect that to continue in their current environment, but obviously depending on the legislative program and constraints on parliamentary resources, that could shift a bit. The National Speed Limit Register, again, this is a tool that we're developing to make it easy for everyone to be able to call up a map. In this case, we've got a little map that you won't be able to see the detail of, but it's Christchurch. And so it enables people to see the 50-kilometre roads, for example, in a particular part of the network. And then people can update and share speed limit data really quickly and easily. So it's, I think, a really useful tool that we'll be able to access and use. The next slide just highlights the Safe Vehicles program that I mentioned before. The Right Car website that's linked there has been significantly improved and upgraded, and we just really encourage everyone to get in there and use it. You can check in your vehicle registration number and it will immediately show you what that car's safety rating is, and also helps people to identify that while most people assume that a safer car will necessarily be more expensive, it's not always the case. We certainly found that when we were recently shopping for a car for our learner driver to be able to use, and vehicles at exactly the same price, and one would be 5 stars and one would be 3 stars, so that you can really do some searching and make comparisons to find something that works in a particular price range. Now, moving on to the regional activities, and I just noting here, all dates here are very much subject to change. As you'll be aware, all activities in terms of projects have been halted because they are deemed to be non-essential, but essential maintenance and management of the network is ongoing, and so Oliver's team is still getting our crews out there to make sure that the network is safe to use. So touching on the New Zealand Upgrade Programme, so this was there was the first 6.8 billion package that was announced in urban areas, and then further 88.3 million for regional roading. And the regional roading includes 2 in your region, which I'll come on to, but these are really critical projects that will provide long-term employment opportunities, both for the crews working on those projects and on that wider supply chain. As you can imagine, in the current environment, that's going to be absolutely critical to the future recovery as we come out of the COVID immediate response. And so we're working really hard on those activities to ensure that we can move as quickly as we can to get those things on the ground. And we'll be looking much more widely on what we can do, both in partnership with councils and the local roads and on our networks as we, the smaller scale initiatives will be something we'll be looking at as well for that very same reason in terms of employment opportunities. Next slide, the State Highway 2 College Road to Silverstream realignment and passing lane. So this, you will have, if you've been driving on there, you've seen we've already had power lines moved in anticipation of this work starting, and there's this work's planned to go out to tender in June, and again we'll be looking to move that pretty quickly. Moving on to the next one, the Tahainui Bridge widening, again something that I know the AA has been really keen to see this for safety reasons, and again we're looking to get out to market on that pretty quickly and just improve that connectivity and safety. We also have the Tairāwhiti East Coast PGF related projects, which are overall that involves around 100 sites that are being looked at for work over the next couple of years. So looking to move as quickly as we can on a number of those and get those up and running, and the more complex ones will go in a second phase. In terms of Hawke's Bay Transportation Study, as Anne mentioned, that's moving ahead. We're really supportive of this. It's just a critical piece of work to underpin future investment in the region. So really pleased to see that proceeding. Going on to the maintenance program, so there's been a significant program underway. This has been the biggest year of summer maintenance across the country. So there's some major rehabilitation work on the access to Napier Port and some of those other key intersections and roundabouts on the approaches to the port, and a big reseal work program that has been completed. Looking at State Highway 2, in particular, Waipukara to Pakipaki. So we had an initial package of works. On the right there is a screenshot of a brochure that we prepared to provide a bit more clarity about where everything's at. So we had an initial package of work that is almost completed. So it was scheduled to be completed by the end of April. That will be slightly delayed, but again, we'll get in there hopefully and get the crews back up and running as soon as we can. We have the cycleway, which now we have land purchase completed. We've got discussions with KiwiRail underway and aiming to get that underway in the middle of the year. And then we've got the two further work underway this year, which is the New Zealand Upgrade Program realignment that I mentioned earlier, and some shoulder widening and a flush median on one remaining section between Te Oti and Pukeho. So quite a significant program of work there. And then we move into the Wairoa to Bayview section, which is 75% complete, and working on the Bayview to State Highway 5 intersection section, and then State Highway 2 Clive to Awatoto to improve that cycle safety and road safety. On that section, which again planned to start in April, again we'll be looking to move on to that as quickly as we can. And in terms of the other key connections in the region, State Highway 2 Hawke's Bay Expressway, again everything pretty much scheduled to be completed this month, and some additional widening that we're looking at on the expressway as well. And finally, State Highway 50, Prevention Hyderabad. That's been reviewed in terms of looking particularly at multimodal safety, so cycling and efficiency improvements, and looking to start that in mid to late this year. So that's all of our stuff. So if anyone's got any questions, I think, Martin, you'll have to manage the queue if there are any specific questions, and Ollie can chip in if he's got specific answers as well.
Thank you. I can't see anyone's hands up. Has anyone got any questions for Emma?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair.
Sorry, thank you very much. Fire away, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Emma. Just want a couple of questions answered. Thank you. The safety improvements to the expressway, can you just give us a bit more clarification on what those are and how those look, and how the RTC actually has a voice in, you know, a local voice, and how we manage those improvements?
Okay, I'll start. So generally speaking, on the expressway, safety improvements involve widening and median barriers through the majority of it. And there were some sections that didn't have median barriers that have been added into that program. That is part of a national program of safety improvements. So that is actually run on the direction of the government, and the government policy statement that we have a focus on safety improvements. And so that's one where we look at those and we bring them into the RLTP as part of the normal processes when we either establish the RLTP or we make changes within the timeframes. So that is part of a national program, as opposed to necessarily coming through as individual recommendations from councils themselves, but it does come through the RLTP as well.
So just the reason for my question, Emma, is the changes that will need to be made now to get emergency services through the expressway. Can you give us an update on those changes that now will be required for that road?
Ollie's
Emma,
probably
I can answer that. Yes. So we did a drive over with the emergency services, and we've identified the sections that require widening. It's not the whole lot. There's a couple of pinch points, and we've agreed a way forward with St John's and the police, and a price level adjustment will be put forward to our project team to secure the funding to do that. And it will, obviously, that work to secure the money is underway, and they'll get onto that once they put the barriers in at certain spots.
So just you know, a question, and it's an obvious question from us all, is how does that consideration be factored into what we do from the outset in our design planning?
It's probably something that we did liaise with the emergency services at the start of this, and they were supportive of the barriers going in from an obvious safety perspective. What is probably overlooked was the pinch points where there are side barriers as well, and they're the bits on the expressway that are causing the emergency services, or primarily the ambulance because of their width, some problems. So we have looked at those, and we have taken some lessons in terms of how we design these up in future as to what the minimum width would be. So we started this process about 3 years ago, and they probably didn't realise the impact that the central barriers would have on the emergency services.
I think, Ollie, there's also a particular issue in this region with agricultural vehicles on the expressway, and again, they're extra wide. And I think one of the things we've taken into all the Safe Network program is that the design has to consider those wider agricultural vehicles in more detail than was previously in the design assumptions. So that's been something we've learnt. We didn't get it right 100% at the beginning, but it's now as part of what is done.
Yep.
Thank you. So Emma, just what really concerns me is the number of cyclists that we are seeing on that expressway now. And, you know, how are we going to take into account and the widening aspect for emergency vehicles, but how are we going to take into account and manage the cyclists that have got a direct link from Hastings to Napier back and forwards to the DHB? You know, how are we going to plan for this? Because this is a problem that we need to be finding a solution for.
So the problem was always there with the cyclists on the expressway. And it is something that, and Anne might be able to attest to this, we have had a workshop on linkages for cyclists. We prefer them not to use the expressway just from a safety perspective, but noted that we can't stop them.
No, direct link.
No, it is a direct link. Interestingly enough, we talked to a guy who'd cycled, he was on the workshop, who cycled to the DHB every day, and he said the expressway was the safest part of the journey because there's no side conflicts or people pulling out of driveways, and he found the Omahu Road and the hill the worst bits because of the side conflicts and the narrow streets. So that's not necessarily an excuse. It's more some context to this. But I know we are looking at you know, what we can do for cyclists between the two centres.
So
do we have any data, Ollie, on actual cycle injury accidents on the expressway?
Yep. Yeah, I think there's been three or four. Two of them were middle of the night, all in black. So they're not necessarily during the day, people taking care with, you know, how visible they are. So, but that's it's still the thinking that when we provide the widening for the emergency vehicles, that'll also provide some separation for those that do decide to cycle on the expressway, to separate them from the traffic somewhat. So before the barriers went in the middle, there was plenty of widening for them to use, and they found it relatively safe.
So, you know, is it a cost prohibition that we could that we wouldn't just provide? We know we're not four laning at this stage. So what we know is that, you know, people want to cycle there. We've had these injuries where there is budget in parts of government. What is stopping us providing a cycle link? I know the bridge will be an issue, but
Yep.
I'm just saying,
So,
what, you know,
Sandra, on that, in terms of it, this is where the current GPS negotiation and RLTP development are absolutely critical. So what the GPS is saying is that the government wants to see mode shift, and so therefore it will be putting funding where there are activities that will contribute to that. So what's required in that, and this is in some of the detail in the current GPS, is that the region needs to have a clear cycle network that you've identified that's your future preferred network for cyclists, that's safe, separated, and it's going to encourage mode shift and also support the other aspirations of the region, whether that's tourism or getting kids more active or everything else. Once you have that plan in place, and then you can start to prioritise these sections, because you can't build these things necessarily in one hit, but you can start to prioritise the sections and where they should go, and which parts of the region they connect up as a priority. And so looking at the GPS, seeing where those opportunities and where the funding is going to be aligned, and that mode shift message is really strong in this GPS, and then making sure that you have your regional cycle network really clear and identified, and then starting to prioritise the individual projects into your RLTP, and potentially even looking at where you do some of the thinking around some of those key things, like, you know, do you have a separated bridge? They're pretty expensive to get cyclists over key waterways, or whether you look at other opportunities, like if you've got new bridges, you'd look at clip-ons, but other options. And so you gradually then can build out that completely separated network. So that's the way to do that.
Thanks, Emma and Sandra. Look, I've got 5 other hands up at the moment. I'm keen to move the discussion along. This is an important issue, obviously, and I just support Emma's comments that I've seen about safety with inclusive access, different modes of transport being a key focus of the new GPS. So whether there can be any immediate solutions, there's certainly something on the long-term horizon by way of opportunities to have both mode shift and greater safety on that expressway. Now, I've got a Craig, then Craig Thu, then Paul, then Kate, and then Jag. So who's the first Craig?
Craig
All
Little,
right.
you there?
Craig Little. Oh, sorry. Yes, of course.
Emma, just
Craig,
on your speed limits, how do you see that going to happen? Because it just, from my experience, it's not an easy process, and over the 9 or more years I've been on the council, we've actually got it wrong on a couple of occasions, and we had to go back and change it, and that wasn't an easy process, but it may be easier than what you might have come up with. So I'm just interested in that, and how are you going to hear from the community to do that?
So are you referring to the new legislation?
Yeah, you said it's not going to be a bylaw anymore.
Yes. So look, that legislation is still in development, and I don't have the detailed information in front of me. So it's still got to have consultation as part of that legislative process. So some of those details aren't, they're not set till after the legislation will pass.
A good go at it, because it is a really hard one.
So that, Craig, that's a legislative process. It's not our process. So that's run by the Ministry of Transport, through Parliament. So you need to go through, your officers need to make sure that they've got access to that information and go through that process.
All good.
Thank you. Now, Craig, too, if you'd like to.
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Emma. Probably part of this might relate a little bit to the RTC's ultimate submission on GPS, but also in Arataki. Just, Emma, interested in the environmental space. What the Arataki plan doesn't have a lot in there, just in terms of obviously the higher awareness of urban stormwater and road runoff. Just interested around what thinking's going on both at an MOT level around funding allocations to deal with urban stormwater, but also if you're aware of what's happening in the space around banning copper brakes in cars. I know there was an LGNZ remit on that back to government around, because there are alternatives as far as I understand, and the removal of copper brakes would deal with one of the main heavy contaminants of urban stormwater, making it away into the waterways. Just the other one, I just hope that with all the safety equipment we're putting in, we all know that it's really expensive to maintain because it has very short lives. So there's always a drive to bring the overall expenditure down, but all this new stuff we're adding is adding cost. And at the moment, what we're seeing is it's taking cost money away from actually looking after pavement and the long-term safety of the actual alignment. And I guess final point, and it does partly relate back to Mayor Hazelhurst, is as far as I understand, and it was said by the Associate Minister of Transport at the Cycling and Walking Conference before COVID-19 hit us all, and Sir Brian Roach talked about, so this current pool in NLTP has significant cycling money left. And just wondering if you're aware if the board's had any thoughts around changing the FAR rate to enable either local authorities to push on with projects that may be able to help stimulate the economies as we pop out of this COVID-19 and employment reshift.
Sure, okay, I'll go through those 3 points one by one. So in terms of GPS, arataki and environmental, those areas like urban runoff and banning copper brakes and so on. So the first thing is that obviously part of your response to GPS, if those are areas you want to see highlighted or more specific information or aspiration identified, then that's really the opportunity is to do that while this current consultation's ongoing. And arataki as well, we will look at, so that the current the area of focus is the reduction in emissions. So that's where we focused our first look at that. And then if the GPS is going to shift that, then we'll shift in response to that. I'm not sure where banning copper brakes on cars for environmental reasons fits in the overall scheme of things. So that's again something that might need a bit of further work. It's not one that I've had raised with me previously. On safety equipment being expensive to maintain, and the maintenance funding continues to go up and should be taking those things into account. And if there are some issues, if you've got some informational evidence that is having an impact, then I suggest that's something that you should be bringing up in your operational discussions with our team. And if that looks to be a significant issue, then we'll certainly consider it. Finally, on the cycling dollars, yes, I'm aware there are a range of messages out and about on that, and it is one of the more challenging activity classes for us, because the optimism bias that the whole sector tends to have around planning and forecasting when things are going to happen has even more impact in this area, because cycleways tend to be much more challenging for a range of reasons to design and consent. All areas are being looked at in terms of the economic stimulus response that the government is considering, and so I just encourage you, if you have projects identified that are ready to move quickly on, that you have those at the ready for any requests for information.
Thank you. Now we have Paul. Paul Nicholson. You there, Paul? You're muted. Unmute, Paul.
How's that?
That's better.
Yep. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emma. And thank you regarding the Silver Stream, something that we've been campaigning for quite some time. Taranui, the realignment there, the widening of the bridge, are you considering realigning that corner? Because that's still going to be quite a sharp entry onto that when you're heading north.
I can answer that, Emma. The option to realign involves quite a lot of Māori land, and when we went through this before, they weren't amenable at the time to realign. But what we're doing is basically for a small cost. is widening to allow two vehicles to pass on that bridge, which is our primary concern. The issue has been at the bridge rather than the corner, Paul.
Yeah, I understand that. I also understand that from talking to Craig in our council that there was a serious accident that involved one of the girls from the local iwi there, and there was probably a bit more amenable to actually re-looking at that.
The accident was at the bridge, so it was the narrowness of the bridge rather than the corner. So we can ease the approach in and out of the bridge by widening and providing a bit small corner improvements, but we won't be removing that large hill that's on the inside of that bend.
Okay, just another couple of things. Cycling was, we did a presentation to TAG earlier last year on a possible commuter cycle lane on the expressway, and probably being on the eastern side because it was the most logical. If there's forward widening, it was going to be on the other side. I see it's actually been removed off the agenda as a follow-up item. Was there any reason for why that was removed?
I'd have to ask Anne.
Anne, could you speak to that?
Anne?
I can't recall, Paul. That must have been some time ago. I'm sorry, I can't recall, but I can find out and get back to you.
So we did do a follow-up workshop, didn't we, Anne, which had looked at the linkages between Napier and Hastings, and possibly that might be why it was removed, Paul. Because
yes,
that was
I think that was the follow-up, was to hold the workshop. Was that right?
Yeah.
And we have done, but we haven't had a lot of progress since then. It was really around the issues about whether the best commuter route was the expressway or via.
That's right.
What's the name of the road? Just lost my.
One of the back roads. Yeah.
One of the back roads that comes out onto High Road. Somebody help me there.
Brookfields.
Brookfields Road, thank you, and Brookfields Bridge, and that had been what was initially identified in the regional cycle plan as a commuter route. However, Napier and Hastings started progressing its side. Napier was very uneasy about the safety issues on its side of that route, and it kind of stalled there. So then a workshop was held to discuss and try and come to some agreed position around whether we should then be aiming actually for a separated cycleway alongside the expressway. But it is, as Emma has said, it's a major development and involves clip-ons to bridges and all sorts. And so it's kind of stalled at that point.
All right. Thank you, Paul. And I think that will be a live subject for the regional plan going forward, and particularly as signalled, as Emma has pointed out, through the GPS. So, Kate, can I move to you? You've got some questions of Emma now.
Yeah, mine's fairly low key compared to the ones that have been asked, but the concerns that have been expressed to me by people using the expressway, going back to some of what Mayor Sandra said earlier, have been the lack of ability for emergency services to follow, access, pick up a driver heading in the other direction. Particularly, I'm thinking, for example, between Pakawai Road roundabout and the Tutaikuri Bridge, in terms of being able to, you can't cure stupidities, the ones that think they can now speed through there because the cops can't get them going the other way.
We did talk to the police about this. Due to the volumes on the expressway, they were not meant to be doing U-turns anyway, even before the barriers. So they've now built in that, so that they've actually discussed, and they've just changed some of their operational the way they work. So if they see someone speeding the opposite direction, they'll ring through for someone coming to get them going the other way. So yeah, they shouldn't really been doing U-turns anyway. It's not safe to do it.
All right. Now, excuse me, I've got someone else iPad. Someone else has got their hand up. Paul, you've still got your hand up. Someone else has got their hand up. I can't see your name, so.
Yeah, Martin, the iPad, that's me. I don't know why I come as iPad, maybe somebody's a practical joke. I just want to endorse what Mayor Sandra Hazelhurst is pushing forward. It's definitely an activity that should really be pushed. And coming back to the presentation, the Road to Zero, I don't see any electric vehicle mentioning in there because electric vehicles are going to be key vehicles in the future. And I think we need to look into that, and whether it's actually a car, a truck, or a bike or a scooter, we need to really think about that. In Europe, for instance, the country with the most bikes, 25% of work trips are done by bike. And that's where we need to go in 50 years' time. Just because we haven't got the infrastructure, we don't think it. We shouldn't think that our population won't use this mode of transport just because the infrastructure is not there. And those who came to the summit in Napier, where the minister spoke, we also heard that if you, for instance, take parking spaces away, it actually increases economic activity in cities and towns. And Rick Barker and Councillor Rick Barker and myself have had a bit of fun. And we think, under a stimulus package, we should now remove 50% of all the car parks in Napier and Hastings while nobody's watching and nobody's using them, get the forestry guys to plant them up, and they won't even know, and it will happen. And that's really how Europe has predominantly done it. They've just taken parking spaces away, and people will find alternative ways to get into town. I was amazed how in Wellington, standing in front of streetlights 4 weeks ago, how many electric bikes came out of the suburbs compared to cars, which was actually quite amazing. And think about a parking space for an electric bike versus a car. And most cars had single occupants. So that's all I'm having to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek. And those are exactly the sort of thoughts that I'm sure will inform the discussion going forward. Is there any response you want to make to that, Emma or Oliver, or should we move on to complete the meeting?
No, nothing to add.
All right. Hey, look, I think that is the end of.
Trying to unmute.
Sorry, who's speaking?
Oh, that was Emma. Look, I just think that's where that the looking beyond the 3 to 6 years of the statutory requirement of the RLTP and bringing in what do you think is desirable in 10, 20, 30 years for your region is a really important part of the thinking that this RTC needs to do. So I just endorse that.
Wonderful. Hey, well, look, I think that's the end of the formal agenda, isn't it, Anne? Normally we would have had a whip around the room and just asked for all the different people at the table to have an opportunity to sort of brief the meeting. I haven't done that. Is there anyone who's got a burning issue that they wish to table, just any upload or briefing from their sector perspective that they wish to share with us before we close?
Yes, please, Martin. Just one thing from me, James Palmer here. Look, I'd just like to register a vote of thanks to Anne Redgrave and Megan Wellesby and our bus drivers and all those that are cleaning our buses for the incredible response that they have moved to over the last few days in terms of altering the public transport provision in the region, our bus services, and the ongoing work and support of essential services through this period. It's been particularly challenging with bus drivers needing to go into self-isolation in reasonably significant numbers, rejuggling, obviously, the scheduling, the programming, and all that around that. So I just would like to have that noted and recorded. Look, suggest that maybe the committee itself might like to make a public statement in thanks of those that are serving the public transport at this time.
Thank you very much, James. That's very apposite, timely, and appropriate. So thank you for sharing those comments. Mayor Walker, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I echo the thanks from James. I think it would be entirely appropriate for our committee to thank those public transport drivers and the work they're doing. I think that would be very good. I actually have nothing to add in terms of update, but would like to ask Ian from the trucking perspective and Andrew from the port, just about how they're coping, whether they've got enough drivers, and sort of from their perspective, is there anything that the rest of us can do to support them?
I'll let Ian go first, Mayor Walker. Ian, you're on mute, mate, so just take your mute off and have a chat.
Yep. Okay, thanks for the opportunity. I think one thing I would like to elevate, as an industry, we're struggling at the moment more with facilities, as in public toilets. Most of the petrol stations and or normal facilities our line haul drivers would be using are closed. So to the mayors mainly, or the councils as such, I know it's probably a shutdown thing and it's hard to maintain, but I'd urge you to leave them open for those essential services, not only transport, obviously, the tanker drivers and other people that are essentially working along. I think availability is okay, but panic buying has created a massive surge that we're struggling to get through. Our expectation as a company is probably by Monday, Tuesday, we'll be able to get 40% of our people in lockdown. But like others, essentially there's probably at least 50% that have to continue with food, animal husbandry and other primary products.
Mm. Could I just, in response to that, Ian, just thank you for raising that about the public facilities. And I'd like probably everyone to know this, but the Joint Committee, Civil Defence Joint Committee, which includes all of the mayors and is currently chaired by Rick Barker, we are meeting by video every night and raising these kinds of issues to be dealt with. So I commitment to you, Ian, to discuss that with the mayors and the response committee so that we can get some clarity about public facilities for your guys.
Thanks, Alex. We've raised it through the forum as well, so they're going out to most other regional areas to try and get a solution one way or the other, even if we have to put some portaloos on the odd corner somewhere would aid it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian.
Thank you for raising that, Ian. Look, I've just got one issue I want to raise with James and Anne. Did we reach a landing on how we were going to address the direction for free public transport for essential services and how that would shake down in the Hawke's Bay regional context? Is that something we should report to this committee?
I can respond to that partly. We have done some more work on it, but we are planning on presenting it as part of the long-term plan because of the cost implications. It was outside the arena of the annual plan, but it's partly further developed, but there's more work to do, and as it's going to be part of that long-term planning process.
Of many more in the immediate context at the moment.
Oh, sorry for the yes. So I'll just give you a quick rundown on what's happening in terms of public transport. All fares have now been removed from all public transport across the whole of New Zealand. So councils are taking, well, NZTA eventually will take a huge hit in terms of lost revenue from public transport. That was a national policy agreement decision that was brought about by concerns about interactions of the public with drivers. We've moved to a reduced bus timetable, which is designed to be used only by, and this is also a national directive, only to be used by people commuting to work at essential services and for supermarkets and essential access to supermarkets or health services. So we have had a few issues with people accessing the services because they're free, for purposes other than that. But again, the national directive has been very strictly that bus drivers don't get themselves involved with policing who's using the service. So we have rear door entry. We've got seats blocked off at the front to keep people away from the drivers. And we are attempting to step up how we will trace people if need be through bus services, and councils that have video monitors on their buses are asking everyone who gets on to record their name and address so that they can be traced if need be later. We and quite a number of other regional councils don't have those facilities, so we are looking at just widespread advertising, asking people to record which services they've used on what day. As
you, Anne, that's very helpful. Thank you, Anne. That was very helpful. That was my concern, one for the welfare of the drivers, but just how could you practically enforce or monitor who was actually getting onto the bus? So that's very helpful. I've got two hands up at the moment. Craig, I'm going to go to you.
Thanks. Hey, just Ian, just picking up on your comments. Be quite useful if you could flick through to either me or to Jag just the locations that would suit. But for your information, Tarawera toilets on 5 are open and operational, and I think we've got about 4 or 5 sets that we've left open, and I know Napier has listed them. We just haven't advertised them strongly because we didn't want all the Freedom campers to suddenly camp around them. But we'd be able to get a list perhaps for your drivers, and then we can, if we understand where the gaps are, we can see what proximity we've got to perhaps help you guys out.
Thanks, Craig. I haven't got any specifics in Hastings. I haven't had any issues here. It's more Tokeroas and State Highway 5 and that sort of thing. But it would be handy if you did have a list of what you've got open. I'll just circulate it with Sandy through the industry, and at least they're aware of where to go. They don't all have to be open. It's just knowing where there is a relief place. So I'd appreciate that. You've got my email address. Thank you.
So just to pick up on that, so through you, Mr. Chair, I just wonder in terms of supporting all of our truck drivers, Emma, is that something that you could follow up for us with the wider North Island NZTA?
Well, I know that we are certainly in regular contact with the RTF and the trucking companies, but obviously there's it might be more of a local government New Zealand thing in terms of the managing the risk of people. Obviously, you regionally, Craig's been indicating that there are some risks of people then self-locating, self-isolating around those facilities. So it's I can certainly raise it with our people, but it's not something that we have a lever to pull on that. But it might be more something that local government New Zealand could look at.
Thank you. I've got Alex, your hand up. You're on mute. There you go.
Sorry, I just hadn't taken my hand down.
Okay, all right. Well, look, I think that's the discussion. Can I just round out with the following 2 or 3 observations? One is, sorry, someone want to talk?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Andrew Palleray, Napier Port, just responding to Mayor Walker's request for an update.
Sorry. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Look, just very, very briefly, the port is obviously working very hard to maintain and facilitate the movement of essential goods and indeed services, working on a number of scenarios with Civil Defence and the Ministry of Transport around what we need to plan for right now in the immediate future over the next sort of few days, and then potential scenarios going forward if further space and facilities are needed by, for example, emergency services, Army, Civil Defence, etc., Navy. So we're just what we're really doing, and I guess really important for as many people to be as aware of as possible, that the movement of essential freight and services at the port requires non-essential freight to also move. So, and that for example includes logs, and there's been a little bit of confusion just as the dust settles with the new operating environment we find ourselves in, relative various iterations coming out from the Ministry of Transport around guidance on what can and what cannot move and how it should move. Obviously, Port is very cognizant of not adding any unnecessary risk of virus transmission either within the port environment or within the wider community of Hawke's Bay. So very, very careful around our processes, and we have been very careful around our processes way back since the end of January, just to prevent the spread. Obviously, there's been a few things that have snuck through, unfortunately, but hopefully we don't become a significant source of infection in the community. So we're very, very cognizant of that. But as I said, the sympathy probably needs to go, and the awareness probably needs to be back on the truckies, as you know, adding to some of Ian's needs. They need to be really supported in their ability to move non-essential freight to ensure that the port doesn't get snarled up with that non-essential freight to enable the essential freight to move, if everyone understands me. That means you might see trucks moving things that you don't consider to be essential for you know, essential health and well-being at the moment, but it's essential for us, if you like. So that's why you see that freight moving. You might see log ships coming in the near future, and ask yourselves, why are those coming? That's not essential at the moment. They present a risk. Well, we need the space, so the logs have got to move, and the Ministry of Transport is supportive of that. So those are the sorts of things that are going on. Very, very challenging time, very, very careful in the way we operate, and happy to share any further details. If anyone wants to see the updated guidance from the Ministry of Transport on what can and can't move at the moment and how it should move, it's available on the Ministry of Transport website. And even these last few days, I think there have been about 3 or 4 iterations of that as they work really hard to try and clarify things in an evolving environment. I think really that's probably the main items off the top of my head on what's happening at the port in this point in time. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much there, Andrew. Look, as I say, just to wrap up, can I thank John for hosting this meeting? Can I ask you all to stand by for the Q&A and the GPS briefing, get feedback to Anne on the context statement, and also stand by for further, I guess, communication around the workshop opportunity that we've got. There is a lot of good work we can continue to do. I have a sense that issues are going to arise for you all of a transport nature that you may wish to convene an urgent discussion of this committee to address. If that's the case, do go through to Anne or to me, and we can facilitate that and invite everyone to participate who's available. So I think that's everything. I'm going to close the meeting. If Api would like to do a karakia to close, that's great. If not, I can do one. Can we move to that, please? And thank you all very much for attending in this manner in these most unusual times. All right. I'll close with the following karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te araha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, aki, 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 āmina.
Kia ora.